Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Thursday, January 16th, 2025, and today we're going to do a crop focus on onions, both starting from seed and planting, including why you do not need to trim your onion tops. And we'll also talk about a passive way to create soil mix, maybe, so let's do it. All right, well, beautiful Thursday to you, and I'm feeling pretty good, actually, pretty rested, because I think I fell asleep at like 7:45 last night, which, if I could pull that off every night, I totally would. We have a mean forecast coming up, snow, and maybe multiple days in the single-digit lows next week. I need a Florida farm, I'm just saying. So today, I want to talk about growing onions from seeds because that's what's on my mind. Well, onions and shallots. In the first segment, we're going to talk about starting onions from seeds. And in the third segment, we'll discuss planting and fertilizing onions. So I prefer onions from seeds rather than sets or plants because I have the space, a greenhouse, to grow them from seeds, and it's cheaper for us. That said, buying bulk onion plants, if you can find the varieties that you want, is still generally pretty cost effective, though of course that assumes you've priced it out and that you can find organics plants, which isn't always possible. Sets, which are just tiny bulbs, are a little more expensive, and in my experience, we've had more issues with bolting from sets than from seeds or from plants. But also, I haven't done it enough times to know if it's just the varieties I've chosen for the sets or perhaps the time of year or how I planted them or something. Onions are biennials, so they will bolt if they think they went through a winter, a spring, and then a winter again. Thus, the reason I don't recommend sets generally, as they are onions that have already done one part of that cycle. Though some sets are treated in a way that reduces that bolting, but anyway, I like focusing on seeds. For seeds, not every onion variety is right for your region. Onion bulbing is triggered by day length, meaning that the number of hours you get in a day will determine which bulbing onions you can grow. So for instance, in the southern United States, where summer days are not as long as they are, say, up north, you want to stick to what are referred to as short day onions. Vidalias are an example of that. Short day onions are often planted in the fall, though they could also be started in a greenhouse in the winter, and then they are harvested when they bulb up in the summer. Now, most onion variety descriptions will say what latitudes they are adapted to, so knowing what latitude you're in will help you determine what varieties you should grow. As we move further north, we get into day neutral or intermediate day onion territory. This is where you start to see a lot of storage onions and even some shallots, which tend to be longer day. Not to brag, but my area on the 38th parallel has quite a few onion options, and I love it. We can even grow the famous sweet Walla Wallas here, but those are ones I recommend having a CSA or market already established for before you grow them because they don't store super well. Delicious as all get out, just not super great for storage. I love growing candy onions, which are our Walla Walla type, but even here in mid-January, we are still eating out of our storage area of candy onions, so they store perhaps better than some of the other Walla Walla types. At least in my experience. Now, the further north you get some more storage varieties and more shallots. That said, you can fudge these things just a little bit. We grow Matador shallot, for instance, here in the 38th parallel, but it's adapted for the 40th parallel and above. They grow fine for us. We get pretty good bulbs, but I wouldn't push that maybe too hard, or you're likely going to get smaller and smaller bulbs as you get further and further away from that adaptation area. I like to start onions after the winter solstice, so typically in January, but if you can start them earlier, that's fine too, as long as you can keep them protected from getting too cold. I just don't want to have to protect and water them over the Christmas break. Also, some customers don't mind smaller onions. We shoot for a medium to medium large onion by planting 2 to 3 seeds per cell, covering them lightly with soil mix. Then, if there are too many in a cell, we will cull them and use them for fresh onion bunches, like after they've grown out a little bit. In other words, I'll still plant like a 5 or 6 set onion because I drop onion seeds sometimes. If there are 5 or 6 onions in that block, I will just start pulling 2 or 3 of them as they mature and then just selling those as like green or fresh onions, effectively waiting for the others to bulb up. In the third segment, though, there is where I will talk more about onion planting. In terms of growth, I will add a little fish hydrolysate after a few weeks just to ensure they grow to full maturity. In the greenhouse, which is around 6 to 8 inches in length or 15 to 20 centimeters. And then we plant them in March, Nothing super complicated. Onions like to germinate in the mid 60s to mid 80s Fahrenheit or 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. So a heat pad is ideal, or a germination chamber if you have one, or your house, whatever makes sense for you. Just get them back into sunlight ASAP once they germ so you don't get super leggy onions. Yeah, all right. We will talk about planting and why trimming onions is not necessary after a quick question from our Patreon members. BRB.
Llegaste a mí como una luz de primavera, con aire puro que libera mi corazón.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Harnois Greenhouses. Harnois Greenhouses has pioneered controlled environment agriculture since 1965, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their unwavering mission is to support growers' success through innovation and expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Harnois Greenhouses are engineered to withstand high wind and snow loads, providing optimal brightness, increased yields, rapid ROI, and long-lasting durability. With over 20,000 projects completed, they are more than a manufacturer. They are a trusted partner. Their structures foster sustainable, energy-efficient ecosystems that drive profitable, resilient agriculture. In 2025, Harnois is introducing a new low-tech, high-tunnel model starting at just $2 per square foot, offering open field growers an accessible entry into controlled environment agriculture. Harnois Greenhouses, leading the way in turnkey solutions for local growers. Learn more at harnois.com. That's HARNOIS.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/notillgrowers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Nathan Leal Crisp, who writes, quote, I was sitting outside looking at my mother's barrel flower pots and was thinking about how great the soil was in there and wished I could use it as a seed starting mix. My question would be, do you think it would be a possible solution to make a better seed starting mix by using containers filled with organic material on the bottom and add enough compost on the top to grow some plants, cover crop mix, flowers, crop, etc. Then when that is done decomposing and you have grown some plants and you have compost/seed starting like substance that has already some associations with plants and the microbes that work with the plant, making the growing medium more like something you find in nature because something is always growing in it. Obviously, depending on how, what, when everything is done, will create different results. Thanks for what you do. My mother's flower pot soil was homemade like described, end quote. Okay, so I love these sorts of questions because there is often a lot to learn by looking at what small scale growers are doing and thinking, could I scale that up or use it in a different way? So I can't say for sure what would happen if you used that mix as a seed starting mixture, but here's what I would consider about it. First, if I understand the potential you saw here, you were basically suggesting maybe build a mound or a windrow or a large container of organic materials, apply a cap of compost or something seeds would germinate in and grow in, grow that out, terminate it, and then use that mixture once it is decomposed a little bit as a seed starting mixture, right? Or maybe you're just suggesting growing in pots that way and then using the mixture the next year as a soil mix, and then maybe I'm just like trying to scale it up. Either way, I think it works out the same. So taking a little jaunt through the, hypothetical here, there are several things I would consider. First is what the organic material is on the bottom. If it's just sticks and wood and mulch or something, you would probably need a pretty ample amount of compost and or soil over top. And it wouldn't hurt to chip the material a little bit just to give it more surface area, make it easier to break down. You could also sort of think of this like hugelkultur, where a pit is dug and then filled with logs and then sticks, and then green plants or nitrogenous material of some kind, then compost and or soil mix is poured over top of that. So that could be a model I would potentially use for building this system on a larger scale, though maybe skip the logs because those won't break down quickly enough. Next, water is going to be a big part of this system, as you will need water not just to germinate the cover crop, but to grow them out and enable the decomposition below ground. Lots and lots of water will be required for that. Then you grow that cover crop, terminate it, and I would definitely cover the pile probably with a water source underneath of whatever tarp you use or whatever you have, and allow it to decompose further. Then you would probably want to sift it all before using, and even consider just a little bit of blood meal for nitrogen or something like that. But it probably would be pretty robust soil mix on its own, with potentially, like you suggested, a nice buildup of those plant associating microbes from the cover crop. Whether it would be worth all that work, hard to say. If you had equipment and materials, though, it wouldn't hurt to play around with it. Might be a nice passive alternative to peat moss-based mixes. I can't remember if I've mentioned this or not, but I don't think so. Our buddy Paul Wargo from Mountain Roots Farm in Tennessee sent me a video where he found a really great preliminary result using screened wood chips layered with chicken manure that he let mature for a few months in a vertical composting setup. Then he just used that as a soil mix, and it outcompeted his other soil mix. It could be a very simple version of this, which again is peat-free, albeit without the plant associations. But I personally love the idea of generating passively made soil mixes like that. I also think there is some potential in reusing soil mixes from containers as long as you amend them a bit, unless you didn't take anything out of them, like in the case of cover crops, which you're basically growing a crop and then just putting it back in the ground instead of removing any of those nutrients for like you would with a food crop. Anyway, fun question, and I look forward to hearing any examples of that or thoughts on that from the comments, and we'll discuss those tomorrow for Feedback Friday Day. I don't think I have to put day at the end of that, but what's done is done. For now, let's get back to discussing onions. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Peaceful Heritage Nursery. If you're looking for hardy and resilient fruit trees, berry plants, or pawpaw trees, then check out Peaceful Heritage Nursery. Peaceful Heritage Nursery LLC is a mail-order nursery shipping premium quality fruit trees and berry plants across the USA. They specialize in resilient, non-GMO plant genetics for small growers. Their diverse selection includes berries, cold-hardy figs, passion fruit, gumi, mulberry, and much more. They're famous for their diverse selection of premium quality grafted pawpaw trees. 5-star Google ratings and customer testimonials attest to their commitment to excellence in quality and service. Find them at peacefulheritage.com and join their mailing list. Once again, find them at peacefulheritage.com. Use the promo code NOTILL, all caps, one word, for 10% off your first order. All right, back to the show. All right, so yes, continuing on with our onion focus, at some point in time, you will have to plant your onion seedlings. So we should probably talk about how to get them in the ground. Again, we grow our seedlings out to about 6 to 8 inches or 15 to 20 centimeters before planting. But that's somewhat arbitrary because we will usually just get them in the ground in mid-March regardless of what size they're at. But usually we want them at roughly that height if we can. Now, basically, everyone on the internet will tell you to trim the onions before planting them to create bigger bulbs. But as I discussed in the onions video I did a year or two ago, which I will link in the show notes, that's not really true. It's one of those pervasive garden myths that floats around and everyone believes because it's been around for so long. And to be fair, I actually believed this idea as well for a really long time because it's just like a thing people say. But eventually I was like, wait, is that accurate? Because I do that with basically everything. So the science says that a long time ago, a lot of the bigger onion growers were struggling with planting onions because onion leaves and roots tend to tangle together, making it difficult to separate them. These growers wanted to know if trimming the tops would harm their onion yields. So researchers looked into it, and the answer that they found was somewhat nuanced, but more or less, yes, it will probably hurt your yields a bit, but the economics may bear out in the labor it saves you. So if it will help you to get your onions in the ground faster, then you can trim, but you may just lose a little yield and likely just lose more onions to disease. And then they give examples of like, if you trim it at this many days, you'll lose X percentage of your yield, whatever. Then someone presumably saw larger growers trimming their onion tops and assumed it boosted yields, and the idea took off. So no, you will not likely get bigger bulbs by trimming onions. It probably will be the opposite. You may just get more disease and maybe nothing at all. So it's not a necessary step, but it may also untangle your onions, so it could be helpful for some of you. Also, another thing people say is that trimming them will keep them from laying on the ground, and I can't find any research on that specifically because it's such a specific thing. And I've certainly never seen our onions start to flop over in the garden, but there is some research that says planting your onions on their sides will reduce yield. So if they are falling over, well, I still wouldn't trim them, but I definitely would make sure that they're planted straight up and down. And I would probably plant them just a little bit deeper to ensure that. As for bed prep, make sure the soil is weed-free and draining well. I always apply a small amount of good fertilizing compost just to ensure the onions get off to on the right foot. But onions tend to be relatively low maintenance nutrient-wise. Some studies have demonstrated that continuing organic fertilization will increase bulb size, but also potentially risk greater levels of disease. In fact, a conventional 2022 study from the Great Lakes found, quote, synthetic fertilizers and insecticide inputs can be reduced substantially without compromising onion bulb yields, and this should lead to greater profits and a reduction of chemicals in the environment, end quote. So effectively, people have been adding fertilizers like kind of throughout the life of the onions, and what we're learning is that that may actually decrease yields. So interesting finding. Could be entirely contextual. Hard to say. So anyway, I like the initial compost application and then just keeping the beds clean. The weed-free part is important. Weeds will beat up on any crop, but especially onions. Not only can they scarf down nutrients and water, but also keep dew on and around the onion plants, increasing disease susceptibility. This is, like I've mentioned before, not a crop that I interplant for that reason. I space my soil blocks with, again, 1 to 3 plants per block on a roughly 8-inch by 8-inch grid with 6 rows on a 48-inch bed. Or if we're going to do that in metric, that's 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters on the grid on a 122 centimeter bed. Now, I say roughly 8 inches because I mark the beds with a gritter from Never Sink Farm, and the gritter is more like 7.75 inches by 7.75 inches. But as you can see, that gets a little bit wordy. So 8 by 8 is fine. You get the idea. Push each block into the soil enough so that the block is completely covered, because if you don't do that when you're planting, they'll dry out. But I try not to cover the bulbs too much. It doesn't seem to really hurt them, but it's not necessary for me. I just want the block to not dry out. That's all I'm worried about. If you're going to irrigate them, drip is preferred. Keeping the leaves dry is ideal for disease management. I know that I've mentioned disease here several times, and to be honest, we've never really had any issues with disease or pests in our onions, which we're thankful for, knock on wood. I don't know if this thing is real wood, but I'm sure someone is thinking, well, healthy soil will help protect your plants from disease, which is true, but don't push it. Wet leaves are a playground for disease, so no need to risk, keeping them wet with overhead irrigation if you don't have to. All right. I think for planting and starting onion seeds, we've got that covered. We are still quite a ways out from needing to harvest and cure them, so I will save that for its own segments closer to that time and wrap it up there. Patreon members, make sure to get your questions in. Also, anyone is welcome to go hang out over at the No-Till Growers Forum and converse with all the nerds over there. And it's free and open to the public, and you don't have to log into Facebook to see it, which I think is a huge bonus, personally. Make sure to cheer on your Brighton and Hove Albion Seagulls today as they play Ipswich. Now, you would think that the official Premier League football club of No-Till Market Gardeners would be Ipswich, since they're called the Tractor Boys. But the reality is that it's actually Brighton Seagulls. So funny how those things work out. Anyway, huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No-Till Growers. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer over at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of January, you get a shout out in the show. So big shout outs today to Chris Butler and Life on Promise View Acres. All right, so this is a story about a group of cave divers, and they, where they go and they dive into caves and they search for, things, and they map it out, and they're poor mothers. But anyway, in this one particular cave, let's call it Life on Promise View Cave, they find some hidden treasure. So they all kind of get really excited, and they stuff their waterproof fanny packs with golden coins. But then when they come up, they realize that the earth has gone back in time. And when they think about it, and they all get together and they're trying to figure out what happened, they figure out that the earth has gone back in time to the exact number of coins that they took. So you have to go back to that cave where they went cave diving, which was a very difficult one, just for the record, and put the coins back. But then it's a whole story of, people having to deal with how much power they have, and then the fear of other people having that same power now that the cave has been mapped. So yeah, actually, I would read that. That sounds like a good book. I also hope it doesn't actually happen in real life. Yeah. Anyway, Thanks for watching and/or listening. We will see you tomorrow, provided nobody takes the coins. All right. Have a great Thursday. Bye.